So I'll just introduce the three of us first. So anybody here doesn't know me, I'm Becca Pelly-Fry. I'm an independent curator. And I'm here to facilitate a conversation between Alicia and Florence. So I'm just going to briefly introduce them. Hopefully you know who Alicia is already. Florence Peake, over there, is a London-based artist who's been making solo and group performance works intertwined with an extensive visual art practice since 1995. Quite a long time. You don't, it's true. Presenting work internationally and across the UK in galleries, theatres and the public realm, Florence is known for an approach which is at once sensual and witty, expressive and rigorous, political and intimate. Florence produces movement, interactive sculpture, paintings that use the whole body's physicality, text, film and drawings which respond and intercept each other to articulate, extend and push ideas. I'm not going to list all of Florence's many, many accolades and exhibitions and performances. Suffice to say that she is a brilliant and internationally respected artist, so it's a delight to be talking to her today. Take it, make yourself bigger, So Alicia, obviously this is Alicia's exhibition. This exhibition spans 10 years of her practice, co-curated with Josephine, the director of the gallery here, who's sitting at the front. It showcases both archival and new work. As a trained somatic shamanic practitioner, Alicia looks to ancient ways of connecting to and receiving wisdom from the more than human. In this way, she foregrounds her spiritual practice throughout her artistic work and places all she creates within a powerful feminist framework. So we will dig into some of that stuff in a bit. This exhibition came about from an Arts Council DYCP, and if you don't know what that is, Developing Your Creative Practice grant, which she was awarded, which included spending some time with Florence as a mentor over a period of, how long? A year? Not quite a year?
No. When did it start? August?
Yeah,
about August.
6 months-ish.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Amongst other things, like new material explorations and so on, so we can talk about that in a bit. My connection to these two wonderful artists is that Florence recently took part in an exhibition that I co-curated with a friend and collaborator, Marcel Joseph, called Body Poetics at a gallery called Giant in Bournemouth. So we worked together on that. Alicia and I have known each other for several years now, starting off at a gallery that I used to run called Elephant West in West London. Alicia is also part of a healing collective, which I founded during COVID times, and we've done a couple of exhibitions together. So that's how we're all linked together. So I wanted to just start off by asking you both, maybe we'll start with Alicia and then on to Florence. Why did you two decide to work together over the last 6 months? And what are the overlaps in your practice and where are they different, and what talk about that a bit.
So I I studied theatre with Nick, who was my head of course, right here. And then I started moving more into fine art performance. And, having done that for the best part of 10 years, I wanted to move into sculpture and more speaking. Sorry. More loud. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Okay, there's my theatre training coming through the diaphragm. So, then I wanted to sort of start moving more into sculpture and other mediums, and then I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And then when I got this funding and I could get a mentor, Florence just seemed perfect. I've admired her practice for years. And, you've come more from a dance background into performance, and then also with the paintings and sculptures, and your practice is very interdisciplinary. And then I saw one of your performances at Rich Mix, where you did, you were sort of channeling being a medium with clay. Right, doing a spiritual channeling with the audience through clay, and everything came together. And I thought, oh God, I need to work with this woman. And the way that you've become, your all parts of your practice are equally respected and renowned, and how you sort of traverse between those disciplines, that's why.
Great.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it was really lovely to be asked by you. Thank you. And yeah, I thought that maybe I could be of use in some way, maybe. And then you, I think it was through sort of looking into your practice, I could tell that you had a lot of rigor in your practice and you're quite serious about it. And quite serious about kind of going into, kind of going into the ideas. And I could see that there was this relationship of moving into wanting to explore its, I mean, we both come from these kind of theatre, dance or live art, and I think we've been kind of working in similar circuits of kind of live art, performance art, all of that kind of world. So I thought, you know, that kind of process of, you know, how they interrelate, you know, making these kind of, you know, objects. Yeah, and, you know, and that's, you know, it's quite a kind of tricky thing in a way. To make, I suppose for me, it's always like, you know, I feel like anyone can, right, I'm going to say some quite flippant things and I hope it's, I'm not going to offend anyone. But I do feel like it's quite easy to kind of do, I'm doing a performance, there's something with paper and I put it, you know, there it is, this kind of action, or, you know, there's the kind of result or the remnant or the relic of a performance. For me, it's not about just leaving it there. It's for what happens next to the thing. How does that become something? How are these have had some kind of performance act happen with them, but let's not just stop there. Let's move through it. Let's keep going. And for me, that's very much what interdisciplinary practice is for me. It's not just like, oh, I do this performance and this comes out of it, or it's like that it's a continuation, everything. These are all continuations. So they might have stopped here for a moment. They might have arrived here, you know, for a small amount of time in this gallery, but actually there could be a lot that can continue with this, you know, so you know, how that might be. And so I do think that's, I'm more interested in sort of developing those kinds of processes. And I think you were interested at rather than just doing a performance and the objects that you use in the performance are then things that you can kind of sell or things that have just finished, you know, they're kind of static. And I suppose I'm quite interested in queer methodologies in that way, that fixity and precarity, that it sort of is moving and shifting in that way.
And, you know, I lie awake at night wondering if performance art is really boring. And
I wonder, like, I mean, I do, yeah, it is. I feel, you know, after, you know, I've been at this for 30 years now, and I do feel quite cynical about a lot of it. And, you know, I teach a lot in lots of places, and, you know, you see the same thing kind of regurgitated around, you know, and I'm hyper aware that my practice relies on a lot of performance art cliches and tropes, you know. I feel that I pay a lot of homage to the great, you know, feminist artists of the 70s. So, you know, love you all, you know. You know, I was paired with Carolee Sheeman, but I think in that show that you curated, but there's a lot of that stuff that has become quite regurgitated, you know, and what can we do to kind of have a new, in this day and age, with a whole other kind of context around it. You know, there's shit going on in the world that's fucking awful, you know, and you know, so what is that in relationship to all of these things? So, so I don't know what you asked, actually.
I don't care anymore. Maybe you could, Alicia, just to kind of go back a bit, and we'll come back to where you just stopped, Florence, because I think that's really interesting. There's lots there we can talk about. And maybe talk through the sort of development of your practice from maybe the 10 years that are sort of represented in this room, like how it's evolved for you, and then what the mentorship with Florence, like what happened through that as well?
So yeah, it has been actually really interesting putting everything in a room together, and thank the heavens for Josephine, because I basically showed Josephine everything that I've ever done and went, can we do it all? She said, no, that would be a total mess. And so, it was really good going through that process and having that outside eye. And because obviously when you're in your practice, you're interweaved in it, having you come in and see my practice, understand it, and have an aerial view and be able to plot, if you will, everything together was totally integral to it. I think I came from theatre, and then I moved into performance art, and in performance, there's this scathing towards theatre, the theatrical devices. Oh, get rid of all of that, everything has to be real, everything has to be really pared down. And over the years, I've gone, hold on a minute, I've got all these skills and all this knowledge of theatrical skills, which are actually sick. They're all really, they're all so invaluable if you want to really draw attention to a particular thing. And sometimes I use them now and sometimes I don't. And so I think, coming from that, trying to unlearn all of the theatrical tropes, and then, doing very pared down performance art, doing a lot of performance for camera, was another way of sort of moving away from just live stuff, because these are themselves works. And then, I think, not to make it so personal, but coming into myself, bringing all of trying to create a holistic me. And actually, as opposed to casting things that I've learned into the shadows and trying to unlearn things, bringing them in and seeing what they can do now. And that's why I asked Florence, because you bring all of these things in, and we've had great conversations about this in terms of cliches. Do we try and do everything that's original? No, you can't. Are there some cliches that we work with that we are really acknowledging that it's a cliche and working with that cliche, not as a material, but working with it and what would you say, framing it and using it as a methodology in some ways. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about the movement from performance, and then, as you were talking about, Florence, the objects that come from a performance that are often just left. So I think we're talking about in terms of classic ones, Carolee Schneemann's Interior Scroll, that kind of thing, maybe Helen Chadwick.
Interior Scroll is I think it is. What I'm meaning is I'm rolling around the floor. I'm talking about I think my work is really cliched, really do. Roll around on the floor, marking, and here it is, the gesture of the performance marked, or I get a load of paint and I smear it on a wall and there it is, and I just go, yeah, that was me rolling around. Yeah. Wonderful, it's got great energy, but then can we do more with it, or can it? That has. Well, I feel like it's a bit demeaning to call it cliche, but it has a whole
history.
It's canonic.
Yes.
It's got tons of Gutai, and then you've got your Carolee Schneemanns, you've got your actionists, Viennese actionists. It's all there in there. So and it's a very literal experience, which I love, and I think it's great. But let's kind of see what else can happen with this. What imaginatively goes on for you when you see this? Can we pull more, or does it do something beyond just that? And I'm not putting down anyone that just does that as well. It's it can be really exciting as well.
But then having an integrity to the work, that is. So I didn't do these. I know we said we wouldn't draw attention to particular works, but let's do it. I didn't. These aren't a result of a performance, right? But the making of them is incredibly bodily. I've hand beaten them all. I've cut them all out by hand. I've hand fired them. everything about the act of making it is it performative? No, or maybe, I'm not sure, but there's a performance, the body in action through making it. And I'm very drawn to bodies, which are the primary performance material, right? So, you know, it's not this throwing things around in the performance, but it also is performative in itself. And then we've had big conversations like, are these then used in, unless someone wants to buy them, are these used in performances, you know? Like, are these, like, then, you know, do they come into the performance? They've got, like, their integrity of their own here as sculptures standing in a, you know, a pink wall gallery. But, like, can they then, like, have, you know, how many lives can our work have? And not to demean, but not to just, like, limit them and categorize them as, you know, just results of performance. Yeah.
So everything has more than one life.
Yeah, in a way, or has the potential to, right? Has the integrity to be in and of itself its own work.
Yeah. So you've talked in the past about your practice as a whole, everything you make and everything you do, all the performances are about your experience of being a human inside a human body, experiencing consciousness through this vehicle. So I guess then that can have so many different expressions, right? And like each thing can interrelate, but also can be its own thing.
Yeah.
So maybe we might talk a bit about the thinking about experiencing consciousness through other bodies and how that comes into your practice now as well.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, we only have our own body in this life, right? We can only experience, like, otherness through this vessel, and yet we crave connection, and there is a oneness that we can tap into. And I think a lot of my work goes through, like, the oscillation of that, you know, so the feelings of feeling like that oneness and connecting, in the spiritual practice I have that enables that, and then those moments of feeling like totally alone, totally, like, othered to everybody, disconnected, disassociated, and then the next oscillation is feeling disassociated to your own body, right? Like, you know, and yeah, just oscillating through those feelings as you sort of process, as you go through the process of life. And I think I'm constantly looking at that and making that in my work. And my work, you know, I got asked, funnily enough, a question the other day for an interview, like, why are you so interested in the body? Are you interested in the anatomy of the body? And we had this conversation the other day. It's like, no, I'm not. I don't know anything about the tongue as an organ or a muscle, or, you know, it's not that I'm coming at it from a research biology point of view. It's that it is the only tool that I have to engage and interact with the world around me. And I find, therefore, I'm very grateful to it and fascinated by it, and then all of a sudden it's alien, and then all of a sudden it's everything, and then, you know, and then I think I'm just processing that that washing machine experience of being a human for me, and that's how I do it. So and then there's another sort of theory that humans are the only species that wonder what it is like to be more other than human, right? You don't see a dog being like, oh, I really want to know what it's like to be a trout, you know, and like it's a dog, like it's good at being a dog. And the theory is that humans therefore are very lost, and that's why we're doing what we're doing in terms of the climate crisis, because we're not quite sure of how to really authentically be human. So, you know, there's lots of, you know, and then looking at the shamanic history of that, humans go through this process of shape-shifting, right? So if you're doing a shamanic journey, you can shapeshift into a bear and see what it's like to do that, and shapeshift into a trout and to a bee or whatever. And I think, you know, whether or not you have a shamanic practice or not, we all do that, right? We have this huge level of empathy that comes out in terms of towards other humans, but isn't there a mad statistic that like there's like 4 times more money from the British people goes to dog charities than children charities, right? So we have this huge empathy for the species. It's not just me being like, oh, that's, you know, it's like as humans we identify and we search and reach for that connection with the more than human. And I suppose it's just very much, it's really important to me.
I think there might be a smaller percentage of people that are as engaged with worms as you are.
Yeah. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, probably. I probably would. Florence, do you want to say anything about that shape-shifting business? Does that manifest itself in your work?
In terms of a kind of a sense of multi-special, multi-gendered, multi-dimensional, multi-directional sense of being. I think that's my work. In my work, I play with that a lot, but as a kind of imaginative. So the idea of kind of there is, from my last performance, my last work, Factual Actual, there's this kind of idea of a factual objective body, you know, which has lots of kind of problematics with it, or ideas about that. And then there's this kind of idea of trying to privilege the subjective felt sense of ourselves and the imagined or the feeling sense of, you know, and that's such an incredible resource and such a beautiful thing that in every second we can shift from being one thing. Like, as I'm doing this, I slightly feel my pelvis rise as my spine is starting to feel like a fucking massive snake. And as I'm, you know, and then I reach my arm and I actually feel like my arm is scraping the ceiling. You know, I can feel this through this sensual body. My imagination is, my body is activated in an imaginative process. And I just find that fucking mind-blowing. And I think that we're, you know, if I'm going to do a bit of like, I think quite often human beings are from a very early age are taught to shut down about their imaginative experience of their bodies, you know. I find the word body really difficult, but anyway, we'll whatever, I'm just using it in a very practical way. And that is deeply sensual, erotic, beautiful, compassionate, empathetic to engage in ourselves, in our fleshiness, in that imaginative way. So for me, it's something that I have access to, but I also deprive myself hugely of it, you know. And there's nothing better than being in a dance studio with a load of people rolling around, you know, exploring some of these ideas and the kind of freedom and how that sits outside a very kind of gendered, capitalistic driven kind of world, you know, how there is that, our imaginations and our subjective experience of ourselves. And why isn't that as real and as counted for as, you know, there's Becca with, you know, hair to here, or, you know, has 2 arms and 2 legs, you know, these kind of ideas that we do of kind of scanning and measuring people through this kind of visual, haptic sense that we kind of have. So so that's my kind of relationship to hybridity and multi-special things.
There's one of your works that I really love. I can't remember, but it's the one that you've made where you've set the clay, or the lumps of clay, and when we were talking about it, you're like, it's like an archaeological dig of finding a beast that nobody's ever seen before. And it's like really big, and you've put all the clay from the performance into, I mean...
Like that, I'm going to try it.
You have done this, you've done too many works.
Yeah, I mean, I do these burials. Is it the burial thing?
Yeah, well, and then there's all the glazed ceramics and...
I mean, there's a series of works where I work with kind of burying people under clay and then kind of extracting their bodies, and then it's and then the remnant then gets fired and get performed with and things like that. But yeah, something maybe is that I don't know.
Body politics on the chair.
Oh no, that was something that was like actually a conversation. Yeah, a kind of scraping. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, clay is quite an interesting material for all of this conversation, right? Because it's like the essence, sort of the essence of things in some ways.
Yeah, clay is always, I think I call it like a psychic medium material, medium, and as well as medium, It's kind of psychic kneading, it's a way of, it's a really incredible vehicle for the imagination, to kind of bodily imagination to get played out into.
Is that the first step of evocation in magic?
Clay is? Really?
Well, in the school of chaos magic, the first principal step that any would-be mages should take is to evoke whilst practicing.
Yeah, wow, thank you. That's beautiful.
Great. Something that Alicia and I have spoken about in the past is the idea of imaginal cells. I don't know if everybody knows what that is. If you don't, when a caterpillar comes to that point in its life cycle where it decides to make a chrysalis and go inside it, it completely dissolves inside into the liquid. And when it is me too, it's amazing. When it's a liquid inside, they term that goo is full of imaginal cells. So then it theoretically could become anything, but it always becomes a butterfly. And I think that is super interesting, and I think that relates to both your practices quite nicely.
I mean, you're here to rein me back in if I go off on a tangent, so I'm going to go off on a tangent. It's like, you get in the studio and you go, what's going to happen today? And I have an embodied practice, so it's not like I sit down and go, right, I am going to, I'm looking at Maggie taking the milk snatcher, and I'm going to make a piece about that, and I'm going to base it in a school, and it's not for the research, it's not from a research point of view, it's an embodied thing. And then, I'll work for the day and be like, whoa, okay, that's what happened, okay, cool. And was that always going to happen? Was there really like this element of, could it have been anything? Or was it always going to be because of what the news I listened to that morning, or because of the yoga I did or didn't do, and because of like how much I drank last night or smoked or whatever, and then you get into the next day, and how much of that is sort of predetermined, and it's getting a bit philosophical, but when it comes to our humanity, we can like really explore and try and expand and really queer our processes of being in the world. But, someone that I collaborate with a lot, Roma, who's over there, we worked, sorry, babe. We worked for a long time trying to kind of see if we could, very much performance art, very much two naked bodies in a space doing shit to each other for like 3 hours. Can we really get to a point where we've rid ourselves of how people project gender onto us? I stand in a room, I'm a woman in my mid-30s, I'm naked, you're going to just make loads of preconcept, you're going to go, bam, 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 bam. You read my body, you have a history of how to read my body, and all those symbols you put on me. Can you work so hard to get to a neutral body, or can you ever, and we sort of discovered through years of trying to do this that no, you can't, this elasticity, what we describe it as something like, we just kept like getting snapped back into how we're read. So that's not to say I give up on these methodologies. That's not to say that I'm like, all right, then I'll start working as like a female cis body, and I will just work within those tropes. But it's just interesting. It's working with those tropes and trying to defy them and trying to create a new narrative around how people read your body. Yeah, is probably my last work.
Great. It's like a constant questioning of where the boundaries are. If there is a boundary,
Yeah.
can you push it? Can you go beyond it? Can you take it away completely?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Is that, yeah.
Yeah, and then also being a social creature and being a communal creature, and also if people are in an audience, like they are part of making that narrative. It's not for me as the artist to stand up and to make the narrative new for all of you. You're all going to read it totally differently. You know, that performance, so many people might have identified with it, so many people might not have done. I can't make people read me in a certain way. But then I'm going to stop because otherwise I'll keep going.
I want to maybe ask one more question, because we've touched a little bit on your shamanic practice. Are you happy to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
And how that, I think what you were saying earlier about trying to bring all the pieces of yourself into your practice now, having kind of done some of that spiritual work and energy work myself, that feels like a healing journey to me, like retrieving all the... So can you talk a bit about how those two things relate to each other?
I think when I, you know, found shamanism as a practice, animism as a way of being, it made my work make sense. So that was in like 2017, and my partner and I lived in South America for a bit, worked with shamans in the Amazon, and then came back here, and I was like, whoa, this is different and horrible. And trying to get back into the rhythm of London after living pretty much in a jungle for a year was really hard. And I found, you know, groups of people here, like, that are practicing shamanism in very different ways. And there's like core shamanism, right? So there's like, shamanic practice is basically the oldest human spiritual practice, right? We practiced it, there's evidence of it from 60,000 years ago in caves in South Africa to 30,000 years ago, you know, all those French cave paintings. Yeah, and there are core tenets to all shamanic practice, even though people would not have had, you know, physical connection and communication. So, you know, it's looking at those core tenets. And when I was like, oh, wow, I kind of always had a bit of an imposter syndrome with my work because it was so instinctive and it was so, it came from a point of intuition. And I constantly felt like, I didn't have, and it was really nice to hear you say I had a rigor. You know, I felt like I didn't have the same rigor as like research-based artists, right? That are like, this is what this is about. I'm like, I made this, I worked really hard, I'm not quite sure what it's about yet. I might never, or I might, you know, or it might go, oh yeah, that's because I, you know, heard that on the news this morning and that's just kind of, I vomited it out again. So yeah, I think working with instinct, working with intuition, working with sort of just being in the world and trying to connect to other life forms and other ways of being, and using that way of connecting to things outside of your individual self as a vessel is a process of remembering. This is something that we always have practiced throughout human history. So it's just about getting that back. And as soon as I found that, and I was like, oh, people have been doing this for years. Oh, okay, this is a viable way of making artwork and life happen. You know, and they're one and the same for me anyway. So yeah, I think, you know, and I touched on before with the shape shifting, and you know, you can look at that. Is that empathy? Is that way of tapping into empathy? Is that a way of like gaining knowledge from other life forms? You know, what is it like to, I don't know, like I've done a journey before where I'm feeling really intimidated by a situation and a person. and going into a journey and shapeshifting into an alligator who, like, nothing fucks with it. You know, like, nothing comes and eats an alligator, right? And it has to just sit there and chill, and it can just wait until some food goes into its mouth, you know, and it doesn't have those feelings of, like, oh my God, I doesn't have the feelings of constantly being at threat. Yeah. So that in it, and then I felt like fucking A after that, you know. Yeah, no one can touch me, you know. So it's like gleaning medicine from other life forms that we archetypally are tapped into in our collective subconscious or, you know, unconscious.
Great. Florence, do you recognise any of that? I mean, a lot of we've been talking a lot about shape-shifting, I imagine comes from actual movement practice rather than necessarily a spiritual practice, but I'm making that assumption.
In the 90s, sorry, in the 90s, I did quite a lot of shamanic work, and I was on a real quest. And walking on hot coals and
I haven't done that one yet.
And colonic fasting and all these sorts of rebirth. I did this rebirthing training and became a rebirther, which is a type of breath work that takes you back to your birth and past lives and things like that. So I was very into these kind of processes and I still am, and it gave me such a way of being able to kind of maybe facilitate. I was really shit in one-to-one work, actually. I just was like, oh my God, it's like watching paint dry. But in terms of like group work, I really felt, I loved that, and that's given me a lot. And then in teaching Skinner releasing technique. So that probably, I think, is quite like shamanic work, in that you're working with images that you're placing inside your body, and they're Joan Skinner, who I studied with in Seattle, this was in the 2000s, she called them spiritual archetypes, which I think is quite weird. Like, there's kind of archetypes, but then there's spiritual archetypes. So what the fuck's that? And so she described them as things like, images that are much more to do with spatial elements and a kind of dissolving, this idea you're trying to dissolve and disappear. Like things that at once you can be transparent and dissolve and disappear, as well as being kind of flesh and blood and things like that. So there's a lot of things, but for me it's like it comes back to this incredible resource of the imagination, and this what you're talking about, this alligator is such a extraordinary image, and so this kind of resource that's kind of there that we have, I think is beautiful. But that, with the Skinner work, you speak in a very deep voice about it, and it's this kind of, the advanced way, it's like things like you're falling through endless darkness, and then you're being caught on wind sweeps that are curving through, so that you get taken on these kinds of kind of journeys, that I think is a lot like shamanism, so it's, even though it's kind of very much in a kind of weirdly in a dance. And I taught in like at Middlesex University for 3 years on a dance degree. So it's quite a weird sort of thing, and then Coventry University. So it was a kind of odd thing, bringing this shamanic practice to a very kind of conventional setting, which was really wonderful.
And it's well, first of all, imagination, I believe, is like a real hook into this. It is the spiritual, like when we imagine things, they're not just coming directly from us in a very like practical industrial way. Like it comes from a world outside of our fleshy vessel, right? Or informed by what we've experienced, and a collective consciousness and a collective unconscious, and all those spiritual archetypes. And so I think a lot of people can be put off by the spiritual, and actually, you know, and what that is, and it seems ungraspable and intangible.
I mean, it's a difficult word, isn't it? And it's a very generic term for a lot of different kinds of practices and things. I remember teaching in art schools, and you mentioned the word spiritual, and people would literally like, what? You know, and it was very difficult, you know, because a lot of the people working with these ideas of the spiritual or meditation or different kinds of practices or therapeutic practices, now it's everywhere, isn't it? You know, where loads of artists are kind of incorporating or using its methodologies to make work and things. But, you know, then it was, you know, really like, and it was difficult because it was mainly female presenting bodies that were kind of exploring those kinds of things. So it was a difficult misogynistic environment in that way, you know. So yeah, you know, and it's, you know, it's great that there's kind of, you know, there's not those kind of methodology. I mean, it taps into race, sexism, everything in relationship to kind of feminized practices and craft practices and things that kind of also tie into the spiritual practices.
But it's something that has been, you know, persecuted for thousands of years in the Western world, you know, in order to build the world that we see and live in now. You know, they say that the word shaman comes from the Evenki people, when a Russian explorer went over and, you know, found a group of people who had a shaman. That was the name for their spiritual leader. And they say that we've borrowed it in the West because we killed all our shamans. You know, so it's not like, and, you know, a lot of people, oh, you know, these people doing shamanism in the West. Yeah, okay, there can be a lot of co-opting and a lot of like ways of doing it, but actually, it, like I say, it was the most ancient, global human spiritual practice. So it is just a way of like coming back into our ways of connecting outside of ourselves. And for me, what's really important is a way of sort of breaking down that myth of human supremacy, which we live in and which we see the results of all around us. That's not to say that we should totally submit ourselves to other species and they should dominate, but actually starting to respect other life forms. No dominance. Yes, there we are. Yes, that'd be nice, unless it's fun time.
Oh, I think that's a great note to end on, actually. Yeah, sure. I feel like this audience must have many questions or things to say. Josephine does.
Mine's not really a question as such because I know the answer, but I think it's interesting, and I wondered whether or not you would talk, Alicia, about the process of making Serpent Suckle and the sound piece and how that came about because of your collaboration, your mentorship, Florence. Because I think it's also an important piece given the funding and how everything else happened, but it's also a nice thing for people if they wanted to then listen to it after this.
So I made this little guy on the plinth. Charlotte is presenting it.
Nicely framed.
And I made that in my first copper sheet course. I've only done one. I made it in my copper sheet course. And then Florence and I had a few sessions together, and I asked you to give me a provocation for the next session in between the sessions, and you said, write a letter from anything that you've made, a physical thing that you've made, a sculpture that you've made, to you about, like, from the sculpture's perspective, about how it feels towards you about being made. Yeah, that makes sense? A lot of it. And I did. And I wrote a letter from it to me. And then I, you know, messed around with it in some software. And I played it to you in my studio. And you said you loved it, which was great. And therefore I thought, it must be good. And now it's in here.
It is great. It is great.
Well, I've been trying to think, because I've been getting a bit stuck since you talked about the shields and about the kind of performative element. So I started developing a certain methodology with making work, or I don't know whether it's a methodology actually, I don't know what it is, but it was some research that I did and that I developed from a book, this amazing book called Socrates' Ancestor by Indra Keegis McEwen. And it's just a beautifully written book about ancient Greeks and how they made the crafts people and how they made objects. And there's this description of the metal workers beating the shields. And as you beat the shield, you're beating life into the object. So that as it engenders meaning, you're imbuing life. As you're carving wood, you're through these gestures and these actions, these kind of repetitive things, you're bringing something to life. It's then having this kind of presence in it. And I'm quite intrigued, I continue to be intrigued by this idea of an object. What makes an object look like has energy and presence? And sometimes you look at an object, it literally looks like, or you go to see an art show, it just looks like something's just got no life in it at all. And then, you know, something that is really charismatic and I don't think necessarily that's the answer, but it was part of my inquiry, like what, and then I got this kind of idea, like what's the imagined inner life of that? Like, how's it feeling? What's its thoughts? What's it left? And I'm sure this relates to phenomenology and Heidegger and blah, 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 and all those big boys. But there's something about that then is like, so this kind of relationship to making objects, you know, and sometimes it's useful for me and to write then this object's relationship to its maker. And I love it, like it's like when you rubbed your hands all over me and you beat me, it was like getting kind of 1,000 orgasms. And then I just thought, I felt like, you know, and you could kind of base, I mean, of course it's your own subjectivity, but through that kind of transference, there's some sort of energy that starts to happen. And so there's, you know, it's a kind of fun, slightly naff thing to do, but there's kind of, it can be like a romantic letter, or it can be like this letter of hate. But it's kind of, and it's always quite revealing what happens in that, like what reveals to you, you know.
And it was actually really helpful for me because, like I said before, sometimes I make something and I go, oh, I don't really understand that. I feel it like I very much needed to make it. And it was such a great exercise for going, how does it feel towards me? What is its life?
And
as opposed to me being like, why do you exist? Exactly.
Of your gestures and that relationship, because you know it's you know, sometimes we can very much disassociate from what we're doing in terms of the physicality of something. You know. Anyway, so it sort of is it's like a helpful relational tool, really. Not that it's necessarily a kind of a really interesting thing, but it's just very helpful to kind of transpersonal, interrelational number that you might have with the object that you've just made, you know.
I think it's very useful from a perspective as an audience member as well, as interacting with the object, getting that kind of like sense of personality or life or relationship between them is something you very rarely get. I know it's not a white wall space currently, it's a pink draped space, but you very rarely get that in a gallery space. So I just really, I loved that idea as a, you know, as a methodology, let's say, for mentorship and how it develops. So for me, it was a really wonderful piece to kind of get insight into.
I've just been thinking, as you've been talking about, you know, the classic trope of Michelangelo releasing the angel from the marble, and how there's a male perspective of releasing existence and material, like he kind of, the sentiment about that is that there was something already there and he released it. And I kind of am interested in what you think maybe the gender dynamics are of you kind of coming together and saying that you're kind of imbuing something with life through your act, and whether like how you think like a maternal instinct comes out potentially through your work, or whether that exists at all.
No, I don't have that. No, I feel like, you know, it can be a very slippery thing for me, the experience of, yeah, you know, again, the imagination. Yeah, in one moment I might be like giving birth, and then the next moment might be like ejaculating through a penis. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's like I don't really feel that fixed in an idea of that process of I mean, I think, you know, there are traditionally the maker, you know, and being a dancer with the choreographer to talk about the neutral body, you know, that was my training in the 90s as being a dancer, was that you eradicate culture, you eradicate everything to be a neutral body for the male choreographer's vision to fill this vessel, fill your body, so that you're pure and you can be filled by usually a particular kind of white male that's going to pour his vision into you. Exactly. So, you know, there are these relationships to things that traditionally, but yeah, I don't know. I don't feel particularly wedded in that way.
And I think there's also, sometimes, you know, like I do like refer to some of my sculptures as my little babies, and I have that a little bit, but then sometimes, and this also, who's to say this isn't maternal, like sometimes you feel revolted about with what you've made, or like, do you remember you came in the studio and you were like, oh, what are they? And I'd put loads of like stuff in some sack, in all these different colour sacks, and I was like, oh, I think it's going somewhere, but at the moment I hate it so much that it makes me hate me. Like I hate myself because I hate it, but I kind of need to leave it there because it's going to grow into something. So it's not so much maternal because I don't want to sound naff.
I hate it right now.
But not to be naff, but it's like the work makes you as much as you make the work. You know, like it's that process of like, as you make the work, it reflects back. I mean, is that maternal? But you know, it reflects back onto you, and I think, yeah, not so much for me. Sometimes, and I get what you mean, but no, as well. Hello.
Do you ever? So on that note, do you ever start a piece of work and then just give up on it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then what happens to that?
Don't know. It's in the attic somewhere, or just like break it down and be like, or I hate waste. I can't deal with waste. I'm a very northern father, and you know I have to like use everything. So I get really stressed when something doesn't work because I'm like, I've just wasted all this stuff, and I'm a horrible person, and we can't afford it anyway. And so I will try and bring it back, breathe another life into it. But I mean, you've been quite good for me in that sense when I'm like, God, I'm really struggling. Got an idea, but I need to spend loads of money on it. And you were just like, just fucking spend the money. And B, like, I sometimes hate what I make, and that's okay. And sometimes you do something and you're like, oh, just throw it away. Not throw it away, but do you know what I mean? Just move on, do something else, and you will have learned something through the process of making, even quarter making it, you know.
I noticed something when we did that scanning. I got a real shooting pain in my left toe, and I was like, oh my God, this is really sore. What is going on here? What's happening? And then I thought about your work, really looked at your shadow material, and I just wondered how you dealt. I don't know whether I was feeling your pain in your process, I don't know, but I just wondered what sort of pain what was there, how did you move through that when you were dealing with that material and being able to be so vulnerable and show that stuff, because it was so relatable. It was like, fuck, I think that, but I wouldn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
You know, but so I just wondered, I'd love to know how you worked through that and what support you had and how that helped, like with your mental health and...
Yeah, I think with that piece, I got asked to do a performance in the autumn, and Dean over there got a great space in Bermondsey, the Ugly Duck, and I was like, what's going on for me at the moment? You know, I do want to make, like, again, like, it's not like I'm like, oh, I've got 58 performances that I've already planned and I'm just waiting for places to take them, right? So every time I get asked to do something, I go, fuck, I don't know what to do. And I have that crisis for a bit. And then, oh, I'm a shit artist, I don't have any material, I don't have any ideas. Oh my God, why is anyone asking me to do anything? And then I go, all right, shut up, Alicia, stop. What's going on at the moment? Oh, you can't sleep, you never sleep. I've got really bad insomnia at the moment. Okay. And so I was like, well, that's some time I could use that time I'm lying awake in bed to think about what performance I'm going to do. So I was lying awake, actually at a friend's house, next to a couple of people. It's really annoying when you're lying awake next to someone. And it just came to me. I lie awake, oh God, I'm trying to concentrate on making this performance, and now all I'm thinking about is all this random shit. Can't even concentrate, even though it's the dead of the night. And then I suddenly was like, what am I thinking about? And then I found the rhythm, and then I just sat up and wrote it all next to my sleeping friend, just on my phone. And I actually wrote, I'd say like 80% of it there. And then I got up, got on the train, and then got the train back from, where was I, Windsor or something. And I wrote pretty much 80% of it on the train. And then, I think then I just was like, you know what? Performance art can be so esoteric. And even though it's like the real body, like there's a naked woman stood in front of you being all vulnerable, are you really being vulnerable? If you're okay with your own naked body, which I am, because I just feel like 1 in 8 billion people, it doesn't really matter what my body looks like, right? Obviously, I'm vain a bit. But, like, what do I actually want to do? I want to get past, like, shrouding myself in all these symbols. You know, I'm using this and I'm moving around in this way. And it all, like, that's why loads of people make fun of performance art, because it is so esoteric and because it is so, like it's got this armour of symbols around it, which, you know, then lots of people come to it and go, well, I'm not meant to understand this, I've been made to feel stupid, all of these things. And I just wanted to get past that. I've been wanting to get past that for a while. And I just thought, well, if I want to get past that, I have to be really fucking honest with myself and everyone around me. And and then I just really went for it. And then after I'd done the first one, you were like, we did it in your studio. And you said, okay, can you go any further? And I did actually. I went home and I went really far, and I said, I can't, I'm not there yet, and I can't say any of that stuff until people in my life have died. I decided I just can't, like, that stuff is too much for me. I'm already like being quite raw with it. So does that answer your question? Just rambled for a bit.
It's the bravery. I love that you showing that bravery and that vulnerability allowed it to drop in.
Great.
For you. Yeah. Which is, very brave.
Yeah. But then also it was part of this thing, is like, if I get rid of all this shit that I'm like ashamed of, all of these thoughts that like are cluttering my head up so much that if anyone knew I was thinking about this, they'd all hate me. All right, what happens if I just say it all? Then, I don't know, then I've got a bit more space inside of me. And if people are going to hate me for saying my innermost thoughts, then I don't really want them anyway, you know? So.
Well, 80% of that, I think.
Yeah.
That was 2 of us, God only knows.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like hate.
Yeah.
I think you're all right.
Yeah.
I've got a question, if I may.
Yeah, go on.
I thought it was really interesting what you're both saying in regards to kind of having like the neutral body. And given that this is something of a collective and retrospective series, looking at like, I don't know, a decade of work. I mean, I think firstly, obviously, there's a very hyper-feminine aspect to it all, which I think is fair to say. I mean, there's a concentration on like the female body, the form, as again, trying to get away from bodies, and you suggested with the idea of like trying to move beyond symbols, for example. And at the same time, a lot of your work uses symbols, like there's lots of snakes everywhere, your earrings, and things like that.
Thanks for noticing.
Geometry, like tattoo and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like we live in a world where there is such a deeply entrenched coded language because that allows people who are strangers to identify without having to speak.
Yes.
Because we see each other and like, oh, you've got this and you look like that, so you must be a little bit like me or whatever. So how, moving forward, does one create a space where it's possible to be truly authentic and body neutral and use a language that moves beyond established systems?
I don't think you can.
You can't.
No.
I mean, I don't agree with the idea of a neutral body. That's I don't.
That was my follow-up question.
No, I don't. I don't. That I think is. I think it is a pretty. Could be a fascistic idea. And yeah, I think that our bodies are full of multiplicity and you know, they're full of coded behaviour, full of culture, full of habits, full of all kinds of things. That's what's beautiful about it, you know, and there's all of that going on in every breath, you know, as well as how we're reading each other and things, you know, and, you know, I mean, it's a complicated thing to as well. You know, I'm a white woman here, you know, looking, you know, so it's also a very difficult thing to think it's, you know, that's, you know, I think it's a kind of, I think I've also, you know, you've got to kind of really kind of own what kind of privilege you have in a space as well, you know, with all of this kind of coded stuff, you know, and I think, for me, that's a part of, you know, waking up to shit. You know, is how am I, what is this coded thing, you know, and I don't think it is about kind of going, oh, I want to try and not be read in a particular way. I want to try and, you know, okay, I'm going to shave my head and then, you know, and that might make me seem a bit more queer or that, you know, I don't know. There's just a lot there that I think is maybe not about, yeah, you know, it's just, it's relates all to the different kind of privileges and codes that we're kind of born into.
So
yeah.
As a last thing to that then, would you maybe think that true neutrality kind of pushes towards like a sort of a sterile, I don't know, like having a non-presence rather than any presence at all?
I don't know, but I'm really suspicious of the idea or the word authentic as well. I think it's from being a dancer and doing authentic movement. Do people know that technique? It's like a whole practice, you know, that was developed in the 70s and 80s, and it's a very, very beautiful practice, like amazing Bonnie Bainbridge and a lot of other somatic dance practitioners developed it, but it is a lot like lying on the floor and waiting for an impulse. You know, waiting for that moment which is true and authentic. And it fucking head fucks you because it's like, was that it?
Yeah.
Was that the moment? No. And then it's awful. And then these amazing choreographers, 2 black choreographers from New York that were practicing it, did amazing performance called Unauthentic Movement, and it was just like, yeah, that's fucking it, that is it there, that's authentic, you know, Ishmael Houston Jones, you know, and that was like this, you know, there you felt it, you knew that, you know, through, so it's very questionable what's authentic and what's not, you know.
And I think you know the hyper feminine of this. There is something in that as well. Like, I am a female body. I can't connect to the world, like, outside of being that. The more and more I try to, like, erase it, it's like, it is what I am, right? Like, I have...
elasticity that you said.
Exactly. So, like, let's lean into it. And then if we're going to lean into it, let's really... let's cover everything. And, you know, what is that when you really heighten something, when you really push it, when you are like trying to not decode something, like a bit like, but you know, and it's funny because I don't think I am that. I can be femme sometimes. I can really not be femme sometimes. Like, it's that thing. But the fact is, we do like pink. We do like the way it looks in here, and it's my shirt, so you do what the fuck I want. So, and yeah, it's like what. This doesn't mean this is everything that I am. You know, I'm not like, oh, everything that I do is going to be like hyper femme. But everything around you is me doing bits of my body, which happens to be a female body. So let's lean in and go in. But it's interesting because we weren't really going for that hyper femme. Obviously, we see it and we recognise it. an idea of like a womb-like space, like coming in, and then, but then you can't get away from the female in terms of the womb-like space, right? So it's asking all of those questions as opposed to going, haha, this is my Barbie house, come in. You know, it's, yeah, even though we have made that joke quite a few times, yeah.
Look at those nails.
Yeah, I've got to be matchy-matchy.
You could argue it's like just one big worm going around the sides of the wall.
You could argue that, Jez. And I like that you've argued it.
It's very fleshy, isn't it? Pink is fleshy
Yeah.
as well. Which we
But as in like internal. It's
I don't
not,
know, is it fleshy?
But is
Sorry,
it?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's for, you know, some people it's fleshy, you know, it's
but in
not
terms
really
of the internal, like the internal, as opposed to like, you know, because this is not skin tone, but
No,
it's like more like the in bits, the bit when you put the camera inside.
Yeah.
You know,
Intestines.
yeah, you cervical
Sorry, that's
scan.
yeah.
Yeah.
Inside your intestine now.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. One more?
Hello.
Hi.
I don't really have a question. You were talking earlier about having a sore shoulder, and as soon as I as soon as I arrived in London, I started to get a really painful shoulder. And when you were saying earlier that you had a painful shoulder, I really felt a very strong fuck you, Alicia. And then I was thinking about when we were talking about imagination and talking about thinking outside of ourselves in that way, how valuable what play is. And maybe as like artists, or like, I don't know, I'm just thinking like Amalia doing climbing stuff, or like, you know, I do a lot of wrestling and stuff. We were allowed to play, and it's such a privilege as artists when we play, and how kids use play as a technology, right, to like learn about the world, and adults use it as like ritual relief from having to go to a 9 to 5. And I just thought that maybe is valuable.
Yeah, play. Well, something, I don't know, the privilege of being an artist, yes, it's a huge privilege, and we all talk about this, but also, it's also not. It's also like horrible.
Play,
yeah.
Like, because we play, or we use our imagination in ways that are non-productive, in the ways that capital would like.
Yes. I mean, is it?
There's a toxic misconception that isn't valuable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and is that therefore a privilege, or is that a fucking necessity for some people? Like, it's like, I genuinely just don't know what else I could do or be and where I could be in the world, and that has caused problems and brilliant things. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have something to say about play?
Yeah, I mean, yes, beautiful thing. Yeah, I love what you're saying. Yeah, it's really beautiful. I don't want to assume that people in other kinds of professions or ways of life don't, sorry, it's just really, sorry, I've discovered spreadsheets. Literally fucking hate spreadsheets, you know. Like my studio assistant, I fucking love him. He's so beautiful, but he's obsessed with spreadsheets. And for some reason, he made the spreadsheet, looking at it this afternoon, incredibly sexy, you know, and that was weird. That was very weird. But there was this element of play in that, you know, so how do we bring play and perspective, that kind of thing, to a lot of other things that we do in our lives, you know, but it's, you know, I mean, all I felt about spreadsheets before was terror. Yeah. And, you know, but I don't know why I'm talking, sorry, it's just what's happened today.
Well,
I mean,
like circular way, like some of the very first versions of Microsoft Excel, the person who coded it made it so that if you typed a certain thing to a certain cell, which was like 1,000 down, it would start again.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you for saving me with that. I don't know, I play, I mean, yeah, it's a privilege, as, you know, that maybe one of the main things that we have to allow ourselves to do is play, but there's so much about being artists that isn't, you know, like sometimes rocking up to my studio and I just feel so depressed and like this is hell, you know. So I don't know what, you know, so there's that thing as well, you know, and I don't know.
Yeah, and because my studio is literally opposite my bedroom, and I open the door, and those days I'm like, ugh. You know, it can be an awful, that, like, the instruction, the need to play. I mean, sometimes you already got your work.
There is play, but then there's also the rigour of sometimes it's about a kind of self-examination that is really
horrible.
like vulnerable, and then there's other times when it's not. It's I don't know. I mean, it's I think it's a beautiful thing, but I think it's also to feel that's not that there is a kind of that spreads into loads of different ways of being in life, and you know,
including spreadsheets.
Yeah, I don't know.
I learned recently.
Yeah, I learned how to make it. It's a new discovery for me. That's it was like a really weird experience to have that with a spreadsheet when I fucking been like something.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Wonderful humans.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, darling. Thank you. Thanks, Becca. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.